welcome. Welcome everyone to an introduction into the sacred mind training. I am Chi Vito Koa, and I facilitate the Tree of Totems Spiritual Wilderness School. And we are focused in on bringing back the cultural practices and trainings of living as an intact culture and as a people, such as Vision Quest and youth and adults, wilderness rites of passage to mark the significant shifts as we move through the landscapes of our lives. We offer like elder training in our Awakening the Sage Within that helps us to review our life and harvest the gifts and the wisdom from those experiences so we can bring those forward and carry them into a good way and contribute value to our communities from our life experiences. And we share these ancestral and indigenous mindsets of how we are part of nature. And these same principles that govern nature are also being expressed through us, through our bodies, through our minds, through the landscapes we are traveling through our life. These same principles are there. And when you know these principles and know how nature is working within you and without you, you gain this ability to move through life with this greater grace, clarity, and strength. Yeah. And so the sacred mind training, this is the foundational piece that we weave into every offering we have. And it's so paramount, it's foundational because as you're going through significant life changes or spiritual awakenings, or whether it's these pandemic times, you want to be able to manage the mind and your emotions and be able to have the right healthy boundaries of what you're allowing to come in and how you filter it and translate that, so that instead of collapsing in the world around you, you maintain your strength, your container, so you come from a place of your center. Yeah. And back in the day, it said that in the old days when there were sorcerers, that the sorcerers, they would bury their hearts so that they would gain their power. They would bury their hearts to gain their power. And the elders who I've got to learn with and live and train with, they share that the people today, they too have buried their hearts, but they buried it in such a way that today's people has lost their power. And so we may consider how we suffocate our hearts when we let our minds become consumed by the thoughts and the energies and the emotions that weigh us down. We suffocate our hearts by letting our minds weigh us down. And we allow ourselves to be looped in what we call these self-defeating loops, where we get triggered in these behaviors and mindsets and these mental emotional states that derail us from our power and collapse our container. The way in our relationships that we might get triggered, or in the world or social media, instead of having that container being center. And so you may consider, if we never create a safe space for our hearts to open into, what quality of life can you truly have? If we never create a safe space for our hearts to open into, what quality of life can you truly have? If you never free your mind, never learn how to free your mind and access your heart, how can you ever be free? See, there's this old saying that I have heard expressed through many of the traditions that I have learned from the Buddhist to the Zen Bushman to Christian mysticism to yoga, Taoism. And there's this principle that says, as our mind, so is our world. whatever you are bringing into your mind and allowing to focus in here, that becomes your world. And there are these 3 laws of mind that most people use as a way to disempower themselves and deplete their energy out. And through the sacred mind training, we learn how to use these to bring you into your power and to ground in your center so you have that protection and clarity, focus. And these 3 laws are this. Number 1, what you focus on grows. What you focus on grows. As you focus, so you become. So if you're focusing on stress and anxiety, the conflict in your relationship, where you're struggling with your finances or your health, you kind of become those energies, and you tend to go into the 3rd law, which is as you become, so you experience. If you focus on those problems in your relationship, you tend to experience more of them. If you're focused on certain conflict in the world, you tend to see more of that in your Facebook feed and the news. You draw that in. Health, finances. It's so tangible. So what we want to do is learn how to use these same principles to maintain a sense of center, to bring forth your gifts and carry them into the world in a good way. Yeah. Now, few people today have received this kind of training. Very few people are considered have received this basic training. Right? And so we find that our minds become easily hijacked and conditioned, triggered into these unresourceful states. See, there's a story of a woman who lives beside this very beautiful lake amongst these majestic mountains like I am here. I'm here in beautiful Montana sharing this with you. And she had this beautiful home, and on the outside of her home, she had this beautiful garden, and she had these orchards that yielded this very amazing fruit. And she lived there with her 5 servants, and together they tended to the land and nourished it, and they lived in great abundance together. And one day this woman, she decided she wanted to take a journey out beyond those majestic mountains. And she went away for some time. When she returned back to her home, she found that her gardens had become all dried up and full of weeds, and that her orchards had become barren. When she tried to go into her home, she found that it was locked and that her servants barred her from entering. They took over. This is a very old yogic story, and how the woman represents you, represents your awareness. And the gardens and the orchards represent the mind. The house represents your heart. And the 5 servants represent the 5 senses. Yeah. And when we give control over, and see, many of us, that's what we've done. We've given control over to our senses, to our stimulus, so that we are stimulated by our senses. And when we give control over to them, they run amok. They deplete us. Right? They bar us from, the sanctum of our own heart. And so that's what happens because we have given control over to these senses, and the media and the news and these individuals, they know this, and they use that and these 3 laws to their advantage to keep us disempowered. Now, one of the reasons why so many have a hard time retaking control back of their mind is because they don't know how to lovingly lead the mind to a place it wants to rest. Now, my Baba, this great shaman, this teacher, one of the last of his lineage holders, who I got to live with and train with in India, he shared the story how this wealthy merchant came to visit him one day. But he was away. His student was there, and he welcomed this man in a good way. He gave him a mat and says, "Harry, you can sit beneath the mango tree where Baba meditates," which in India, this is a big honor. Now the man, dressed in these fine clothes, he looks at the mat, and he's like, "I think I'll stand." He starts to pace back and forth, and becomes more and more agitated until finally he leaves. Now when Baba returns, Student tells him what happened, and Baba says, but of course, we're just lowly holy men who live in the dirt. He's a wealthy merchant. Of course, he wouldn't want to rest on a dirty mat. Now, Baba says that our minds are much the same. We never give our mind, a place where it actually wants to rest. If we are always plunging our mind in states of agitation and anxiety, stress and fear and conflict, how will our mind ever rest? Imagine what that does to our nervous system, how it keeps us into a state of fight or flight. Now, when we look to the time of our ancestors and indigenous people who live closely with the earth, we see in their writings, we see in their culture and customs, we see in their way of being a sense of deep connection, a sense of clarity and strength, a sense of inspiration with how they experience life. And there is a reason for that. And the great spirit traditions of the East, such as Taoism, yoga, Buddhism, and so forth, we can see how much importance they put on training the mind so you can rest in a place not only of peace, but rest in a place where you are living in your power, where your heart is unobstructed. Now, for example, in yoga, they have these yoga sutras, the very most important text on yoga. There's 196 sutras. Out of those 996 sutras, asanas, the physical postures, are only mentioned 3 times, and they're mentioned in passing. Everything else is focused on how to condition the mind. So here's the thing. When you know how to give your mind a place to rest, when you know how to engage your senses, bathe them in nature so your senses are being nourished instead of depleted, when you know these ancestral mindsets that give you a sense of foundation, you easily, very intuitively, you bring your whole being into balance. And it's actually quite easy to do. It's just knowing how to do it and being part of a community that holds space for you to remember and to break free from these automated patterns. See, the number one obstacle that people have in learning to train their mind and break free of these patterns in their relationships, finances, or just how they are in the world is that our minds have become automated by what neuroscience calls superhighways. See, our minds have become conditioned in automated ways of thinking, perceiving, and interpreting. Now, the basic element of these superhighways, they serve us, such as brushing our teeth. You don't have to relearn how to do it. Your mind knows it, goes through the motions, it serves you. But for most of us, we have many destructive automated highways that triggers us in our relationships or our health, in our environment, and we just go through the motions, right? So imagine the impact it'll have to liberate yourself from these negative superhighways, these automated loops, and the impact it'll have to establish these automated patterns that nourish the mind, that empower you in your container so it's strong. So you could create the space for your heart to be unobstructed and come forward. And you can live in a place of strength, no matter what is coming outside of you. Especially as empaths, spiritual awakenings, going through specific life changes like relationships, careers, or just these pandemic times. We are being bombarded by influences all the time. And so you want to be able to know how to hold your center and filter things in the right way. And so this is where the sacred mind training is, where you are lovingly held and guided over a 35-day period. And here you experience this shift from a Western approach to this more indigenous mind, where instead of trying to conquer something, it's the adversarial way of conquering the mind, controlling the mind. We move into this place of how do you come into relationship with the mind and what you are perceiving, recognizing we are part of nature as everything else is, And that way you can be in this flow and know how to navigate and move so that no matter what landscape you are navigating within yourself or without in your life, you will have the sense of strength and power to move through it. So through this training, you are learn how to identify these automated patterns, and you're provided these very simple ways to kind of create these new patterns that ground you and empower you. You learn how you collapse into these other states, so you can see that, like, oh, I see that. Boom. Now you can be protected and be in this space. You learn how to harness the mind. Simple rituals and meditations, these indigenous and ancestral mindsets, all of which over this 35-day period help to lovingly weave in these new automated patterns that are empowering you in your life. Om. And it's on this online format. So there's a forum similar to Facebook, so it allows you to get off of Facebook and allows you to be nourished by the conversations of how people are applying their stories, their questions. You can post your stories as well. We have the lodge hours, which is a time where we gather on a virtual council fire through Zoom, and you're able to ask questions. And we teach through these traditional ways of storytelling and dialogue. So you get mentoring, and we hone in these skills, and you hear other people's stories and challenges and how they're moving through it. And then there's the phone app that allows you to get these reminders throughout the day, and you choose how many you want. And they help you. So it's like, oh yeah, come back into the sense meditation and remember what your focus is for the day. And so in that way, it becomes very simple. Yeah. So with that, if this is resonating, if you would like to have that sense of control, especially as empaths, if you're going through life changes, click the link below to get further information. Email me at learning@treeoftotems.com for any questions you may have. I am here, an open book, happy to be of service. All right. So with that, happy transformations. And I'm going to get back out and start trailing some elk or moose and have some fun. All right. Om.